Do you want to set up Consent Mode version 2 on your website? In last week's video, I went over the steps on how to do this in cookiebot. But that video might not apply to you because you might use a totally different cookie banner or consent management platform. Well, in this week's video, I want to show you how to set up Consent Mode version 2 with any cookie banner that is available. And we're going to set it up with Google Tag Manager. Let's dive in. Hey and welcome to the channel. My name is Leon. This channel exists to help you use your web stats in order to improve your website without wasting hours in the process. I want to thank everyone that has been liking my videos and has subscribed to the channel, because that really helps me get these videos out to as many people as I can. And as a way to say thank you, I have created a short cheat sheet on how you can grow the traffic that is coming to your website. So if you're interested in growing the traffic to your website, head over to the video description to download that cheat sheet for free. Also, if you like this video and you want to watch more, just head over to my profile, because I have created tons of videos over the past year on how to set up Google Analytics and how to use that data in order to improve your website. Alright, so we're talking about Consent Mode version 2. Consent Mode is the technology that takes the preferences of your user and applies them to the individual tags in your Google Tag Manager container. So a site visitor might come to your site and then clicks refuse. Well, here in the Netherlands, under the GDPR, it is not allowed to set marketing tags when people do not give consent for that. So Consent Mode lets you fire or not fire tags based on the consent settings that people give through the cookie banner. And I have the free version of cookiebot installed on my site right here. It is not customizable because I'm not paying for it, but it'll do as an example. And you might have any cookie banner. It doesn't matter if you have cookiebot or a different consent management platform, or even a custom-made cookie banner that your web designer built for you. Because in this video, I'm going to show you how to set up Consent Mode version 2 with any cookie banner that is available. So before we dive into the content of the video, I want to do a small check first. So let's go into Google Tag Manager, because I want to make sure that Consent Mode version 2 or whatever version is available is not already set up through some other technology, because there are multiple ways to set it up, and sometimes it is already working even though you might not realize it, or it is working but it is not working properly. So let's hit preview. So I have already the tag assistant open here, and then my site is right here, and then I'm going into the tag assistant and I'm going through the messages from 1 to the end, which is 6 right here. And I'm going to open up the consent window. And here I see the message consent not configured. And this is a confirmation that consent mode is not set up on this site yet. You might have a cookie banner that kind of automatically sets up consent mode. You probably do not want to do this twice. So this is just a way to verify that there's not something else already in motion. All right, now that we've verified that consent mode is not yet set up on our website, we need to do some research. Because the preferences of your site visitor, like do they allow all cookies or do they refuse cookies, those preferences are usually stored in a cookie or in a similar technology. And where those preferences and how those preferences are stored is different for every cookie banner. So cookiebot stores it in a different way than some other cookie banner. So we need to do research on where and how it is stored in order to set up consent mode. Well, let me show you how you do this research. So I'm going to go into my site. I'm going to say allow all cookies. Well, now I have given my cookie preferences. I want to find out where these preferences are stored. By the way, I'm using the Google Chrome browser. This might also work in different browsers, but if you want to follow along, maybe it's best to use the same browser. I'm going to right click on my page and I'm going to say inspect. Please do not feel overwhelmed by all the HTML code. It is really not that hard. We're going to take a look here at the top section where you have different tabs. And we're going to go in this application tab right here. And under the application tab, you have a section that's called storage. And then you have a section that's called cookies. And usually the preferences of your user, the cookie preferences, are stored under cookies or under local storage. And I would say 80% of the times it is stored under cookies. So we're going to go under cookies first. I'm going to look under my own domain. That is really important. So you might see a bunch of domains, but you need to look for your own domain. And that will give you a list of all the cookies that are set up on your own domain. And the first column is the cookie name. And we're gonna look for a cookie with the name cookie in it, or consent, or banner. So the name is different for every type of cookie banner. So that is why we're doing this research, but we're gonna look for something with the name consent or cookie in it. If I go through the cookies, this row, cookie consent, this is probably the one that I'll need. So I'm gonna open up a small text file right here, and I'm gonna remember some of the things. So the technology is cookies, because I found it under cookies and not under local storage. So the technology that is used is cookies. The cookie name is cookie consent. So I'm gonna double click to copy this, and I'm gonna paste it in my notes. And the content of the cookie, I'm gonna double click, or no, I'm gonna copy it from here because it's decoded. That makes it a little easier to read. Yeah, there you go. So this is the content of the cookie. And if I'm gonna analyze it right now already, that I'm gonna inflate it a little bit, but you'll see that necessary is true, preferences is true, statistics is true, marketing is true. So all the different categories that are available inside of my cookie banner are also stored in this cookie. So you might have a totally different cookie banner. What I sometimes see is that cookie banners have set a cookie that has, for instance, a name cookie consent, and then for instance, the content says true. That's totally fine as well. So your cookie banner might be totally different. It doesn't really matter. Or even you might not find a cookie that has cookie consent in it. Then you need to look under local storage, and then again under your own domain. So you might find something in this column right here, where under key it says something with cookie consent. Well, same thing here. So then the technology is local storage, and that is important to remember because the method for retrieving the cookie is a little bit different. The name might be something like cookie underscore consent, and then the content might be something like true or marketing true, something like that. The important thing here is to do research on how the consent on your site is stored, and this is different for every different consent solution. All right, now that we've done our research, let's go back into Google Tag Manager to set up consent mode version 2. I'm in my Google Tag Manager container under tags. I'm gonna create a new tag right here. I'm gonna give it a number. I'm gonna say consent mode default. By the way, I have a very particular naming convention inside of Google Tag Manager to structure my container. I have made a separate video on that. I'll link it down below if you're interested. But this is just for structuring the container. It is not doing anything. And then under tag configuration, I'm going to open this up and I'm going to click through to the community template gallery, because inside of this template gallery, there is a template that is called consent mode. So I'm going to click this search icon right here. I'm going to look for consent mode. And then here I'm using this consent mode template by Simo Ahava. I'm going to click it and I'm going to add it to my workspace. Yeah, go ahead. So now that we've imported the consent mode template into our Google Tag Manager container, we need to fill this out for the first time. And this time we're going to set some defaults. So these are the settings that are applied whenever someone lands on your site and has not yet decided, do I want to refuse cookies or do I want to allow all cookies? So these are the settings that are applied before someone gives consent. And what you fill out here depends on where you live. Or it depends on the target audience, like what countries am I targeting with this website? Well, my target audience and my website is aimed towards the Netherlands, so I'm gonna fill out the settings that apply here. But please be careful, please do some research on your country. This is not legal advice, so if you have any questions, please consult a lawyer. So I'm gonna go in and fill this out for my site. Ad storage is of course not allowed here in the Netherlands under GDPR. So unless you have consent, well, this is the default. We do not have consent yet, so this I'm gonna set to denied. Analytics storage in the Netherlands is still allowed under some strict rules. I know that my site lives up to these rules, so I'm gonna set this to granted. So I'm gonna track analytics storage whether I have consent or not. Add user data, add personalization, I'm gonna set to denied. Again, because I do not have consent yet, and I need consent to track this information. These three categories I'm gonna set to granted. And under other settings, I'm gonna enable pass ad click information through URLs. This is a clever trick that lets you keep some parameters in the URL. When people navigate to the next page and, for instance, accept cookies there, you still be able to keep some of that information. Redact ads data is a good setting that lets you improve the privacy of your users a little bit. And there's a trigger. This is really important. Under triggers, I'm going to go into triggers and I'm going to set this to consent initialization. So this is probably the most important thing in your consent setup. This is the very first trigger that loads, and this will make sure that the consent is set before anything else is initialized in your container. So I'm gonna set consent initialization all pages as a trigger on my consent mode default tag. And now I'm gonna hit save. All right, so we've already applied the default consent settings to our Google Tag Manager container. It is right here, consent mode default. But now comes the hard part. We need to actually apply the actual preferences, like after somebody has given consent or refused cookie consent, we need to apply those preferences as well to our Google Tag Manager container. And there are two things that we need to do here. We need to set up a couple of variables and we need to set up a tag. And I'm gonna take you through this process step by step. All right, let's look at variables first. We're gonna scroll down here to the section that says user-defined variables, and we're gonna open a new variable, and I'm gonna call it cookie consent. And here we need to reference the notes that we made in the previous section. So let me go back into my site real quickly. If you right-click on your site and go into inspect, and then open up the application tab, maybe you remember that sometimes the consent settings are stored in a cookie right here, and sometimes the consent settings are stored in local storage right here. And I've made my own like test case right here where I have consent, cookie consent, and then yes. This is different for every cookie banner, so you need to look through the list and look if you find your consent settings somewhere here. Let's go through those two cases. So first, if you have your consent settings stored in a cookie, we go into Google Tag Manager and we're gonna make a variable with the name first party cookie. And then as a cookie name, I'm gonna copy either from my notes. So I have made it here in my notes, but here under cookies, I have this cookie name right here. I press double click and I'm gonna go back into Google Tag Manager and use that cookie name right here. And please check if you have the same cookie name or a different cookie name, because this cookie name needs to match the cookie name that's on your site. I'm gonna click URL decode cookie and I'm gonna hit save. So this is the scenario where the consent settings are stored in a cookie. Let's also go over the scenario where your consent settings are stored in local storage. If you go into local storage and you find, for instance, a key with the name cookie consent, I'm gonna also copy that, go into Google Tag Manager. This scenario also I'm gonna need to make a new user-defined variable. I'm gonna call that cookie consent. I cannot use the same name, so I'm gonna append the name local storage here. You do not need to do that, but as an example, I'm gonna use it right here. As a variable type, I'm not gonna use the first party cookie, but I'm gonna use the custom JavaScript variable type. I'm gonna use a small piece of code here, which I will put in the video description for you to reference. It looks like this, function, and then return local storage. And then in these brackets, I need to put the name. By the way, it says get item and then cookie consent. So again, I will put a link in the video description to this small piece of code so you can copy that. Please change this piece of text to the key that is where the consent settings are stored on your side, because this changes depending on your cookie banner. Okay, I'm also gonna hit save. So we're not yet done here. I'm gonna make a new variable right here as well, and I'm gonna call it lookup and then add storage. I'm gonna open up the variable configuration and I'm gonna look for the regex table. Yeah, it's right here. I'm gonna set a default value to denied. So this variable is gonna return denied every time, except for one case. As an input variable, I'm gonna select my cookie consent. Of course, if you're using your local storage, please look for that variable. And then I'm gonna say, in some cases, it can return granted. And here is when I need to open up my notes, because this is how the consent settings are stored with my cookie banner. And again, this is different for every cookie banner, so you need to look for your unique situation. But here I know that marketing and a semicolon true, this piece of text is a signal for me that a user has given consent. So every time a user gives consent, I will find this piece of text inside of the cookie. So I'm gonna paste the pattern in here. So there's a special character, and because we're using the regex table, I'm gonna do a backslash right here. This is just good practice every time you're using regex. And under advanced settings, there are a couple of things that you need to do here. Otherwise it won't work or won't work properly. I'm gonna disable full matches only, and I'm gonna disable capture groups. Alright, this is it. By the way, I could make a lookup table for analytics storage as well. So it would look a little bit like this, analytics, storage, and then instead of marketing, semicolon true, I would do statistics, semicolon true. And I could retrieve the analytics storage permissions as well. But I'm gonna keep it to add storage for now, so you'll be able to build from there. I'm gonna hit save. And now I have everything that I need to make it to the last step required in this process. And the last step is that we need to go under tags and we need to make a new tag in our list. I'm gonna call it 9803 consent mode update. And this is where we apply the consent settings after somebody has given or denied consent. So we're going to go into tag configuration. This time we do not need to go into template gallery because we've already imported the consent mode template in our container. So we just have to look under the section custom, and here it is, consent mode, Google tags. This time we're not using the default command, but we're using the update command. And here is where we're going to use the variables that we've just made. So add storage, I'm gonna say lookup add storage. So this is gonna return denied or granted based on the preferences that a user has given. Analytics storage can be granted in any situation on my site, but if you have made your own separate lookup table for analytics storage, you'll need to set that here. Add user data, I'm gonna set that to the same variable, lookup add storage. Add personalization, same thing, lookup add storage. Personalization, I'm going to set that to granted functionality and security as well. Again, I'm going to use the same settings that I have used earlier. So pass add click information through URLs and redact ads data. And as a trigger, I'm again using the consent initialization all pages trigger. I'm going to hit save. And now I've done everything necessary to implement consent mode version 2. The only thing that I still want to do is to test if the setup is working. So to test if the setup is working, I'm going to go into my site. I'm going to go under application. I'm going to go into the cookies and I'm going to delete the cookie consent cookie because I want to check what is happening if somebody lands on the site for the very first time. Of course, cookiebanner returns because I've deleted all my consent settings. I'm going to go into Google Tag Manager. I'm going to hit preview and we're going to see what's happening. So I've not yet given consent. The cookiebanner is still here. I'm going to go into Tag Assistant and I'm going to go through the messages right here to see what is going on. And on the message 1, I'm going to go into consent not configured. Then you have consent initialization, set, and then consent. So here is where all the on-page defaults are applied. So denied, granted, denied, granted. Yeah, this is in line with what I have configured. So again, there's a set command. So this is the second tag. And again, same consent settings apply here. And then initialization tag. So the current state. This is in line with what I have configured. There's no consent given yet for marketing cookies. So all these categories are denied currently. So I'm going to go into my site. I'm going to click allow everything. And I'm going to refresh the page to see what's happening. Yeah, page has refreshed. I'm going to go into the second page here. So under message right here, doing the same thing, just checking what's happening here. So consent initialization set, consent. So this is the default, which is still like the strict without advertising cookies, those settings. And then the second one is based on the settings that the user has given. So I've allowed all cookies. And here I see that all the categories are granted and then initialization. So this is exactly what I want to see. So now I have confirmed that this scenario is working. So the last thing that I want to check is what happens in the scenario where people refuse all cookies. I want to check and verify that the consent settings are also applied well in that scenario. So I'm gonna right click, inspect, go into application, go into cookies, and then remove the cookie consent settings one more time. So the cookie banner pops up and we have a blank slate. So I'm going to refuse all cookies. I'm going to refresh the page and I'm going to see what happens in this scenario. So I've refused cookies. I'm going to go into the Tag Assistant and I'm going to go through all the messages that I have here. So right here under the consent tab, I'm going to go through the messages and I'm going to see what's happening. So this is the first consent message and it says granted, denied to the advertising cookies, add storage. So I verified that the defaults are set correctly. And then the second message sets the add storage and the add user data, add personalization also to denied. So this is how I verify that when people refuse cookies, those preferences are also applied to the container. So now that consent mode is working on your site, you need to apply these settings to the individual tags. And this is the last step in setting up consent mode on your website. The first thing that I really like to do is I like to go under admin and then under container settings. There's a little checkbox right here that says enable consent overview. I'm gonna enable that. I'm gonna hit save. And if you go back to your workspace and go into tags, you'll find that there is a small little icon here at the top right corner. This is called the consent overview, and if you open this up, you'll see a list of tags in your container where it says consent not configured. And we need to go over all these tags to actually apply the consent settings to these individual tags. Let's open up the GA4 config tag right here. You'll find that if you scroll down, that the advanced settings section right here is already opened, and then under consent settings you'll see that these settings are also open by default. And then here you have three options. You have additional consent checks. It's by default set to not set, and here you can choose to say there's no additional consent required, or I want to require additional consent. Well, some tags, and basically all Google tags, have some built-in consent checks. For instance, here, this tag already checks itself, like is there permission for instance, advertising trackers, or is there permission for analytics storage? So the default consent checks are already sufficient in this case. So I'm gonna set this to no additional consent required, and I'm gonna hit save. And I need to do this for every tag in my container. So I'm gonna go over every tag. Plausible, there's no consent needed there. So I'm gonna set this to no additional consent required. By the way, this is a small little shortcut that you can use, so you do not have to open up the whole thing. Just check it and then click here. I'm gonna say no additional consent required. Matomo and Pivot Pro both require analytics storage. So I'm gonna say analytics storage. I'm gonna hit save. So I have a bunch of GA4 event tags. So I'm gonna select them all. These all have built-in consent checks already because they're Google tags. So I'm gonna set this to no additional consent required. Cookiebot, consent mode, they all have sufficient consent checks built in. So I'm gonna do the same thing, no additional consent required. And I have a small piece of code that I'm using for analytics storage. So I'm gonna set require additional storage, analytics storage, I'm gonna hit save. And now I've applied the consent settings to every individual tag in my container. And I see that consent not configured is empty and consent configured is all set. And this is how you not only set up consent mode, but also apply it to the individual tags in your container. And if you've taken all these steps, if you've tested your setup, you're safe to submit the changes to your website. All right, that's it for today. I hope this video was helpful. I hope it was clear. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments below. Also, if you want to watch more, just head over to my profile, because I've created tons of videos over the past year on how to set up Google Analytics and how to use that data to grow your website. All right, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.